why don't you commit suicide in the event of adverse conditions of life? And the second question he asks is happiness something that you pursue or is something that ensues?
Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning provides a vivid account of an individual's experience as a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp. But let's give this some context.
Yes.
During Hitler's reign of terror, men and women and children were expelled from their homes and thrown in trains and sent to concentration camps. The prisoners were not considered individuals with identities, families, or even feelings. Any identity they had, any documents, any possessions were thrown away. They were only left with their uniform and an ID number tattooed on their skin. The authorities were not interested in people, they were only interested in numbers. Now, life in the concentration camps was very difficult, and this is where Viktor Frankl's book becomes very important, because prior to being sent to the concentration camps, he was already a renowned psychologist, and so he had this foundation with which he could use the experience to share this gem of a book with us. So now let's get in the reason to live.
The beauty about it is that Viktor Frankl had started this logotherapy concept prior to getting into the camp. So the camp gives him or affords him a good platform to test his light. You see, light, if something quote unquote is light, it should not be diminished by darkness. It should actually be strengthened by darkness. So he sees himself in the concentration camp as the concentration camp is more like a fertile ground to prove his theory that does this really work, and will this stand the test of one of the most adverse conditions any man can be under? Because the first thing the concentration camp is, it deletes your identity, and then you are reduced to just your bare existence.
Your number,
that's it. And the instant you are not able to provide service, you would be sent to the gas chambers. So you are constantly living a certain primitive kind of life where death is constantly overhanging your head, and then you do not even know what has happened to your loved ones. You don't know whether you see them again. In fact, the first thing that happens when you go to the campus, some are moved to the left and some are moved to the right, and you realize over time that those who were moved to one side, they just went straight to their death.
Yes.
So it's like constantly you are reminded that your life could be lost in 1 second. So that's what he sort of reminds us, that even in the harshest of conditions, the one who has a reason to live would go through that situation anyhow. So at the core essence of what moves people forward is that reason.
Meaning.
The meaning. What is the meaning behind the situation? Even if you are in the darkest of moments and you have that glimmer of hope, that small bit of light, that light at the end of the tunnel, and you can hold on to it, you can use that to transcend that moment, and then that suffering ends with meaning. There are several reasons why you should read the book. For example, the book is an existential book that seeks to clarify the question of meaning in life, vis-a-vis against the nihilistic approach to life. Now, the two questions Viktor Frankl seems to ask is, why don't you commit suicide in the event of adverse conditions of life? And the second question he asks is happiness something that you pursue or is something that ensues? He sort of creates this framework to promote his doctrine or his theory of logotherapy.
Exactly.
Which says that meaning is at the fulcrum of our life. I mean, based from his experience at the concentration camp, he finds that there's always a gap in people's mental states. So he sees mental health as based on a tension gap. A tension gap of who they are today and who they are or who they could be in the future. So once you remove that futuristic block, their mental health spectrum, you collapse their mental state and you force them to become nihilistic. So you realize that the prisoners in the camp who lost the future gave up and then accepted whatever fate the concentration camp had for them. And then he realized that within a short period of time, those same people that were at one time very bright, at one time very energetic, they had lost all that vigor, they had lost all that energy, and then they were either transitioned into the gas chambers or they themselves passed away by some either a typhoid or some disease of a sort.
They had died themselves before their
Yes.
bodies actually
Yes.
died.
So some sort of soul death before the actual death.
Exactly. And that is the same thing that has to do with anxiety and fear about the future, where the fear of the future is more crippling than the events of the future itself. But now that we've said that the purpose of life
Yes.
is meaning,
Yes.
what can humans do when they find meaning in life?
Then they can live out the full aspects of their beings. So Frankl gives 3 avenues to the discovery of meaning. 1, work. 2, the experiences we have. So that could be love, friendships, etc. And then 3, suffering. So he gives those what you call the triad. So he has what he calls the tragic triad, the existential vacuum triad, and also the meaning triad. So the meaning triad is the work you engage in, your vocation. Second, the people around you that seem to enhance your life, and then 3, adverse conditions. So once you lose out that fulcrum or that pivot of meaning, you are placed in this this cycle of pain, guilt, and death. And there's something he says at the beginning of the book. He says that if there's a purpose in life at all, then there must be a purpose in suffering and in dying.
Explain, Omar.
Mostly because, you see, life usually does not give to everyone what everyone seeks at the time everyone is seeking it. So one way or the other, we are going to go through one form of adverse condition or the other. And that's what I call suffering. And he says that the meaning in life is not actually the absence of the suffering, but the meaning in life is actually the transcendence of the suffering. So at a point in the book, he talks about one Jerry Lowry. He had like an accident or something of a sort, and he became paralytic from his upper limbs down to the lower limbs. But then he used that as an avenue to restructure his life to become beneficial to others. So you could be in an adverse condition, but the way you take that condition, process it, and then use that energy to fuel others, like the way Christ put it, unless the grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, that bites alone. But when it dies, it brings much more fruit. And then he uses the practical stories he tells in the concentration camp to say that, you know what, in the same concentration camp, you had people that behaved like devils, like the couples and etc. Although they were not like the prison guards or prison wardens, they found ways to inflict hardship on their own people. And they had people going through the same situations in the concentration camp who had enough reason to become quote unquote saints. So 2 people going through the same situation, but different responses. So you realize that it's not actually the situation that determines the response.
It is your approach to the
situation.
Let's wrap it up. Okay, and that is where we wrap up part 1 of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. When we return for part 2 of this book, we will delve more into responsibility and finding meaning of life through love. Subscribe to the channel, like, and share your comments.